The winter of 1882 came to Montana Territory like a punishment from God himself. Snow fell thick and relentless over Silver Creek, a mining town carved into the mountain's flesh, where men came to dig fortunes from the earth and more often found only graves. The wind that December carried voices from the past, whispers of old debts, and the kind of cold that settled not just in bones, but in the soul. Samuel Crow Feather felt that cold as he rode into town on a painted horse that had seen better days just like its rider. At 7 feet tall, he was a monument of a man shoulders broad enough to carry mountains' hands, scarred from a lifetime of violence and survival. His face told stories he never spoke aloud. A scar ran from temple to jaw on the left side white, against copper skin, the gift of a cavalry saber during a skirmish he had fought on the wrong side of, depending on who told the tale. His hair, black, threaded with premature silver, hung past his shoulders beneath a wide-brimmed hat that had weathered as many storms as the man who wore it. He was Apache. That simple fact made him a ghost in most towns, invisible to some, a target to others. But Samuel had learned long ago how to move through the white man's world. 15 years as a cavalry scout had taught him their language, their laws, their lies. The blue coat he once wore had earned him a measure of respect, though it cost him something deeper, something he could never quite name. The letter in his coat pocket crinkled as he dismounted. Paper worn soft from being unfolded and refolded 100 times over the past month. The handwriting was feminine elegant, each letter formed with care. He had memorized every word. Samuel, when you read this, I will be gone. But I ask you one thing. 15 years from now, go to Silver Creek. Find a girl named Ilara. She is my daughter. I had to leave her with Josiah because I could not protect her. But you can. Please, brother, save my daughter. Sarah. His sister's last words to him, written before she took her own life 5 years ago, or so he had believed. The letter had arrived at his cabin on Bear Mountain 6 months ago, delivered by a stranger who refused to give a name, left it on his doorstep like an abandoned child, and vanished into the forest. Samuel had stared at that letter for 3 days before he understood. Sarah had planned this. Before her death, she had arranged for someone to deliver her final request exactly 15 years after she fled to Silver Creek with Josiah Brennan. 15 years to let wounds heal or fester. 15 years for a daughter to grow into a woman who might need saving. He tied his horse outside the Lucky Strike Saloon, a building that leaned slightly to the left, as if drunk on the whiskey fumes that seeped from its walls. Through the frosted window he could see the warm glow of oil lamps, hear the tinny notes of an out-of-tune piano, the rough laughter of men who had nowhere else to be on a Saturday afternoon. The town watched him as he crossed the frozen street. Faces appeared in windows, then disappeared just as quickly. A woman pulled her child inside and locked the door. Sheriff Cooper, a weathered man with gray in his mustache and caution in his eyes, stepped onto the porch of his office, hand resting casual but ready on the pistol at his hip. Samuel paid them no mind. He had come for one man, and that man was inside the saloon. The warmth hit him like a fist when he pushed through the doors. Smoke and sweat and spilled beer, the perfume of desperate men. Conversation died in waves as heads turned. The piano player's fingers stumbled into silence. Josiah Brennan sat at a corner table, cards spread before him, a bottle of whiskey at his elbow that was more empty than full. 15 years had not been kind. The young miner Sarah had loved was gone, replaced by this hollow thing. His face was bloated and red-veined hands trembling as he reached for his glass. Yellow eyes that had seen too much bottom of too many bottles. Samuel walked toward him, boots heavy on the wooden floor. Each step was measured, deliberate. The crowd parted without being asked. Josiah looked up, squinting through the haze of drink. Recognition came slowly then, all at once. The glass slipped from his fingers, whiskey spreading across the table like blood. "You," he rasped. His voice was gravel and broken glass. "Me," Samuel said quietly. "I don't owe you nothing. Josiah's words slurred together, belligerence replacing fear the way it always did with drunks. That was 15 years ago. We're square. Samuel pulled the letter from his pocket, placed it on the table between them. Sarah's handwriting seemed to glow in the lamplight. "You told me she killed herself." Samuel's voice was soft, but it cut through the room. "You said she hanged herself from grief. Postpartum melancholy, you called it." "She did." Josiah wouldn't look at the letter. "She did that herself. I tried to stop her. You lied." Samuel leaned forward, and Josiah pressed back in his chair. "I saved your life at Cedar Creek. You remember when the Cheyenne had you pinned down, ready to take your scalp? I pulled you out. You swore you owed me. You swore you'd take care of her. I did take care of her, until she couldn't be taken care of no more. Where is Alara?" The name seemed to strike Josiah like a physical blow. His eyes darted to the stairs at the back of the saloon, then back to Samuel. "I don't know who you mean. Your daughter. Sarah's daughter. Where is she?" "Ain't no daughter here, just me." Josiah reached for the bottle with shaking hands. "You should go. This ain't your concern." Samuel's hand shot out faster than a man his size should move and caught Josiah's wrist. The bones felt fragile beneath his grip, bird hollow and brittle. "I will ask one more time. Where is the girl?" For a moment something flickered in Josiah's yellow eyes. Shame, maybe, or calculation. Then he smiled, and it was the ugliest thing Samuel had seen in a long time. "You want her fine. Take her." "She's upstairs, back room. Can't hear, can't talk. Worthless burden. You take her, we'll call that debt paid. Fair trade, don't you think?" Samuel released his grip, disgust rising in his throat. "You would sell your own daughter." Josiah laughed a wet, phlegmy sound. "Sell? I'm giving her away. That's generosity, Apache. More than your kind ever showed mine." The words hung in the smoky air. Samuel could have killed him then, could have snapped his neck with one hand, easy as breaking kindling. 15 years ago he would have. But 15 years had taught him that some men weren't worth the blood on your hands. Instead, he said, "Cards. What you're a gambling man, Josiah. Always were. So let's gamble. One hand of poker. I win. I take the girl. You win. The debt is gone. Plus $50. $50. Josiah's eyes lit up with the sick gleam of addiction. "Cash money." "Cash money," Samuel confirmed. The saloon erupted in whispers. Men pressed closer, eager for spectacle. In a town where entertainment was scarce, this was better than a hanging. Josiah glanced toward the stairs again, then back at Samuel. His tongue darted out, wetting cracked lips. "Deal the cards," he said. They sat across from each other. The bartender, a thick-necked man named Henderson, brought a fresh deck. Josiah's hands trembled as he shuffled cards, slipping and sliding. Samuel sat perfectly still, watching not the cards, but the doorway at the top of the stairs. And that was when he saw her. She was barely visible, just a sliver of shadow behind a tattered curtain. But Samuel's eyes, trained by years of tracking game and enemies across vast distances, caught the movement, small, careful, watching. The cards were dealt, 5 each. Samuel picked up his hand without looking at it, his gaze still fixed on that shadow upstairs. Josiah studied his cards with the intense concentration of a man whose entire world had narrowed to 5 pieces of paper. He threw down 2 cards, drew 2 more. Samuel discarded 3, drew 3, still not looking at what he held. Because he didn't need to. The girl behind the curtain, she was moving. Her right hand rose to her shoulder, fingers spread, then dropped, then rose again, this time to her neck. The movements seemed random, unconscious, the nervous gestures of someone watching from hiding. But Samuel understood. Years ago he had lived among the Kiowa for a winter, learned their hand language, the silent speech that could carry meaning across canyons and prairies. Later, working with cavalry scouts who had lost their hearing to cannon fire and close-quarters gunfights, he had learned other silent tongues. The language of the body, of gesture, of space between words. This girl, this Alara, she was speaking. Her hand on her right shoulder meant high. On her neck meant bluff. When Josiah shifted in his seat, she touched her left ear, low. When he smiled, she brushed her collarbone. False confidence. She was reading her father like a book written in a language only she knew, and she was translating for Samuel. He had come to Silver Creek expecting to find a frightened child who needed rescue. Instead, he had found an ally. The betting began. Josiah went all in, pushing his meager pile of coins to the center of the table. "I call," he said, voice tight with anticipation. Samuel laid down his cards. 3 queens, 2 tens. A full house. Josiah stared at the cards, then at his own hand. 2 pair jacks and 4s. His face went from red to white to purple. "You cheated," he hissed. "I sat across from you the whole time," Samuel said calmly. "Everyone here watched." Which part was cheating? Josiah looked around wildly, seeking support, but found only neutral faces. In a town built on gambling, accusing a man of cheating without proof was dangerous business. Sheriff Cooper stepped forward from where he had been watching by the door. "Looks like a fair game to me, Josiah. You made the bet. Time to pay up." For a moment, Samuel thought Josiah might fight. The man's hand twitched toward a knife at his belt. But then he seemed to collapse inward, all the air going out of him. "Fine, fine. Take her. Good riddance." He stood unsteadily swaying. "Girl," he shouted toward the stairs. "Get down here." The shadow behind the curtain didn't move. "Now, girl, or so help me." The threat hung unfinished. But Samuel heard all the words that weren't spoken, heard years of them, a lifetime compressed into silence. He stood and walked to the stairs, each step creaking under his weight. The crowd parted again. At the top he paused, giving the girl time to retreat if she wanted time to choose. The curtain moved. She stepped into the light. Alara Brennan was small, barely 5 feet tall, with dark hair that hung in a tangled curtain past her shoulders. She wore a dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to discern beneath the patches. Her face was pale, hollow-cheeked from hunger or fear or both, but her eyes, dark and deep as mountain wells, held something Samuel recognized immediately: survival. This was not a girl who had given up. This was a girl who had learned to endure, to adapt to fight in ways invisible to those who didn't know how to look. She held a small slate and a piece of chalk in her hands. On the slate, in precise, angular handwriting, were 3 words: "Thank you for playing." Samuel felt something shift in his chest, a foundation stone moving after years of stillness. She had known. From the moment she saw him sit down, she had understood what he was trying to do, and she had helped him. They had formed an alliance without speaking a single word. He extended his hand, palm up the gesture, neither demanding nor pleading. An offer. A question. She looked at his hand, scarred and massive, capable of breaking her like a twig. Then she looked at his face, studying him with an intensity that felt like being read in a language he didn't know he was written in. Slowly, she placed her small hand in his. Her fingers were cold. They descended the stairs together. The saloon had gone quiet again, but it was a different quality of silence now. Anticipation mixed with unease. Josiah stood by the bar, already pouring another drink. "Don't come back," he muttered, without looking at them. "Don't either of you ever come back." Alara's hand tightened in Samuel's grip, but she didn't look at her father, didn't acknowledge him at all. She had already left him behind. They walked out into the December cold. The horse waited patiently, breath steaming in the frozen air. Samuel helped Alara up, then mounted behind her. She sat rigid at first, every muscle tense, but when he wrapped his buffalo hide coat around both of them, she leaned back slightly, accepting the warmth, if not yet the trust. As they rode out of Silver Creek, Samuel felt eyes on them from every window, every doorway, felt the weight of judgment, the heat of scandal. An Apache and a white girl riding off together. The stories would start before they were even out of sight. Let them talk. The journey up Bear Mountain began in silence. Snow fell steady and thick, each flake a small white promise of burial. The world narrowed to the path ahead, the rhythm of the horse's hooves, the warmth of two bodies sharing one coat against the cold. Samuel kept the pace careful. The trail was treacherous in winter, narrow in places where one misstep would send horse and riders tumbling down slopes that ended in rocks and broken bones. He had traveled this path 100 times, knew every turn and switchback, but never with someone else depending on him. An hour into the ride, Alara shifted in front of him and pulled out her slate. She wrote something and held it up so he could read it over her shoulder. "Where are we going?" Samuel considered how to answer. He couldn't speak while riding, and riding on horseback was impossible. Instead, he pointed ahead and up toward the peak of Bear Mountain, barely visible through the snow. Then he held up 4 fingers. 4 hours, she understood. She nodded and tucked the slate back into the pocket of her dress. They rode on. The forest closed around them, pines heavy with snow, creating a tunnel of white and dark green. The only sounds were the creak of leather, the horse's breathing, the soft whisper of falling snow. Samuel found himself hyper-aware of the girl in front of him, the way she held herself carefully so as not to lean too much against him, the way she startled when a branch cracked under snow weight, the way her head turned at every sound, relying on sight, since hearing betrayed her. She was exhausted. He could feel it in the gradual way her body relaxed despite her efforts to stay alert, the way her head began to nod forward, then snap back up. When they had been riding for 2 hours, Samuel spotted a familiar landmark, a lightning-struck pine that stood like a skeletal finger pointing at heaven. Near it, he knew, was a small clearing he had used before as a waypoint. He guided the horse off the main trail. Alara tensed immediately, fear returning to her posture. Samuel touched her shoulder gently, then pointed ahead. She couldn't see the clearing yet through the trees, but she seemed to understand that he had a destination in mind. The clearing appeared ringed by ancient pines whose branches created a natural shelter. Samuel dismounted and helped Alara down. Her legs buckled slightly when her feet hit the ground stiff from cold and riding. He steadied her, then gestured around the clearing. "We stop here," he said, even though he knew she couldn't hear him. The gesture itself conveyed meaning. She nodded and immediately began gathering fallen branches, moving with practiced efficiency despite exhaustion. Samuel watched, noting the way she tested each branch before adding it to her pile, discarding those too green or too rotten. Someone had taught her, or she had taught herself, through hard necessity. He cleared a space in the snow down to bare earth, arranged stones in a circle, built a fire with hands that had built 1,000 fires in worse conditions. The flames caught quickly, fed by dry tinder he kept in a pouch at his belt, grew strong, pushed back the darkness that came early this time of year. Alara sat across from him, the fire between them like a bright barrier. She pulled out her slate and chalk but didn't write anything, just held them in her lap, waiting. Samuel reached into his saddlebag and produced jerky and hard bread. Not much, but enough. He handed her a portion and watched as she ate slowly, carefully, like someone who had learned not to trust that food would be there tomorrow. When she finished, she wiped the slate clean and wrote, "Why did you come for me?" It was the question Samuel had been expecting. He pulled out Sarah's letter, unfolded it carefully, and held it out to her. She took it, tilted it toward the firelight, and began to read. He watched her face change as she absorbed the words. Confusion first, then shock. Her hands began to shake. The letter trembled like a bird trying to fly. When she finished, she looked up at him with eyes full of questions that had no easy answers. Samuel had prepared for this moment. He pulled out a second piece of paper, one he had written before leaving his cabin. He handed it to her. "My name is Samuel Crow Feather. Sarah was my sister. I believe she was your mother. I came because she asked me to find you. You are not a burden. You are family." Alara read it once, twice, 3 times. Then she picked up her chalk and wrote on her slate in letters that pressed deep into the black surface. Josiah said, "My mother died giving birth to me. He said it was my fault." Samuel's jaw tightened. He took back his paper and wrote on the reverse side, "Josiah is a liar." She stared at the words, then erased her slate and wrote again, hand moving faster, now harder. "Are you really my uncle?" Samuel nodded. "Yes. Why didn't you come sooner?" He had known this question would come, had dreaded it. He took the paper back and wrote slowly, choosing each word with care, filling the entire back of the page with cramped handwriting. "I didn't know about you until Sarah's letter came. She left you with Josiah when you were 3 years old. She made me promise to stay away, said it would be dangerous for you if I came. She said she would send word when it was safe. That word came 5 years ago, but it said she was dead. I thought I had lost my chance. Then 6 months ago, another letter arrived telling me to come now. I don't understand why she waited, but I came as soon as I knew." Elara read this, then sat motionless for a long time. The fire crackled. Snow whispered through the pines. The horse stamped and snorted softly behind them. Finally she wrote, "I remember her." Samuel leaned forward, firelight casting his shadow long and strange. She wrote more. "I remember her singing. I remember the night she died. It wasn't childbirth. It was him." The words hit Samuel like bullets. He took the paper and wrote in large letters, "What did you see?" Elara's hand trembled as she wrote, the chalk scratching loud in the quiet. "I was 3, but I remember. I woke up. I heard them fighting. I looked through the door. He had his hands around her neck. She couldn't breathe." She stopped moving. "I tried to tell people, but no one believed a 3-year-old child. I kept trying to tell for years. So when I was 7, he made sure I could never tell anyone ever again." She set down the slate and pulled down the collar of her dress. In the firelight, Samuel could see the scar across her throat, white, and raised the mark of a blade drawn with terrible precision. Josiah had cut her vocal cords. Rage rose in Samuel like a living thing, hot and black and howling. His hands clenched into fists. Every muscle in his body tensed for violence, for the ride back down the mountain, for the justice that came from his hands, and no law. But then he looked at Elara's face and saw not fear or vindication, but exhaustion. Deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She didn't want revenge. She wanted peace. He forced his hands to unclench, forced his breathing to slow, forced the fury back down into the dark place where he kept all the violence he could no longer afford to release. When he trusted his handwriting to be steady, he wrote, "I'm sorry. I failed you. I failed Sarah. I should have known. Should have come sooner." Elara erased her slate and wrote simply, "You're here now." 3 words. But they carried the weight of absolution he didn't deserve and forgiveness he hadn't earned. They sat in silence for a while, letting the fire warm them, letting the horror of what had been spoken settle into the snow and be covered over, buried but not forgotten. The wind picked up howling through the trees like something alive and hunting. Samuel added more wood to the fire and spread out the bedroll he carried. "Sleep," he wrote on a scrap of paper. "Tomorrow we reach home." Elara looked at the single bedroll, then at Samuel, question in her eyes. He gestured to himself, then to the ground near the fire. He would sit watch, keep the fire going, keep her safe. She hesitated, then nodded, and lay down on the bedroll, pulling the blanket Samuel offered up to her chin. Within minutes her breathing slowed, deepened. She slept. Samuel sat with his back against a tree rifle across his lap and watched the night. The fire painted everything in shades of orange and shadow. The snow continued to fall, building small drifts against rocks and fallen logs. He thought about Sarah, about the sister he had failed to save, about the niece he hadn't known existed until it was almost too late. The guilt was familiar, an old companion. But alongside it now was something else, something that felt almost like purpose. Around midnight, Elara began to whimper in her sleep, small sounds of distress that built into something closer to panic. Samuel moved to her side, careful not to touch her, and added more wood to the fire so the light would be there if she woke. Her eyes opened suddenly wide with terror, looking at something only she could see. For a moment she was lost in whatever nightmare held her. Then her gaze focused on Samuel, on the fire, on the present moment. She sat up slowly, pulling the blankets around her shoulders, looked at him, looked at the fire. He wrote on his paper, "Bad dreams." She nodded, then wrote on her slate, "Always, every night since I was 7. What do you dream?" She was quiet for a long time, then wrote, "I dream I'm screaming for help, but no sound comes out. I dream he's coming with the knife again. I dream I'm 3 years old watching my mother die, and I can't move, can't help, can't do anything but watch." Samuel read this and felt his heart break in ways he thought no longer possible. He wrote, "You're safe now. I promise. On my life, you're safe." She read it, then looked at him with those dark ancient eyes. "How can you promise that you don't know what tomorrow brings?" He wrote, "I can't promise tomorrow, but I can promise tonight, and tomorrow night, and the night after. One night at a time until you don't need the promise anymore." Something in her face softened. She nodded and lay back down, but this time she positioned the bedroll closer to where Samuel sat, close enough to see him, to know he was there, but not so close as to feel trapped. She slept again, and this time there were no nightmares. Samuel kept watch through the long hours. The snow stopped around 3 in the morning. The sky cleared, revealing stars so bright and numerous they seemed like holes poked in a dark cloth to let heaven's light through. He thought about the promise he had made, one night at a time. It was all he could offer, all anyone could offer, really. The future was smoke and mirrors. Only the present moment was real. As dawn began to gray the eastern sky, Samuel gently touched Ilara's shoulder. She woke instantly defensive, then saw him and relaxed fractionally. He pointed to the horse-made eating gestures. She nodded and began gathering her things while he prepared a simple breakfast. They ate in comfortable silence, the morning cold sharp and clean. Then they mounted and continued up the mountain. The final 2 hours of the journey passed more quickly. The trail grew steeper, the air thinner. Ilara's breathing became labored, and Samuel slowed the pace to accommodate her. When the cabin finally came into view, nestled against a rock face, as if the mountain itself had exhaled and created shelter, Samuel felt something ease in his chest. Home, such as it was. Ilara stared at it, and Samuel tried to see it through her eyes. It wasn't much. One room built from logs he had cut and fitted himself chinked with mud and moss. A stone chimney rose from one end, smoke already threading into the sky from the fire he had banked before leaving. A small porch. A window with real glass, his one extravagance. But it was clean. It was warm. It was safe. He helped her down and opened the door. The heat rolled out to meet them, and Ilara made a small sound almost like a sob at the sudden warmth after hours in the cold. Inside she turned slowly, taking in every detail. The room was simple but carefully kept. A bed built into one wall enclosed with a curtain for privacy. A table and 2 chairs, both made by hand. Shelves lined with books, more books than most frontier cabins would ever see. Tools hung on wooden pegs in careful order. Carvings filled the remaining spaces, small animals and human figures that Samuel made during long winter nights when his hands needed to be busy or his mind would wander to dark places. She pulled out her slate and wrote, "You live alone." Samuel nodded. "For how long?" He held up both hands, fingers spread. 10 years since Sarah died. She absorbed this, then wrote, "It's peaceful." Samuel almost smiled at that. Peaceful, yes. For a girl who lived in silence, peace would be a gift, not a punishment. He pointed to the bed, then to himself, then to the floor. The meaning was clear. She would sleep in the bed, he would take the floor. She started to protest, but he had already pulled out a second piece of paper where he had written, "I'm used to it. I prefer it. Beds make me feel trapped." This was true. After 15 years of sleeping on the ground under open sky in closed spaces still made his skin crawl. Elara accepted this with a nod, then wrote, "Thank you for everything." Samuel shook his head and wrote back, "Thank me when you decide to stay. For now, this is just shelter. Tomorrow we figure out what comes next." But even as he wrote it, he knew she wasn't going anywhere, and neither was he. The first week passed in careful adjustment. They moved around each other like dancers, learning new steps, establishing rhythms and boundaries. Samuel woke each morning at dawn as he always had, built up the fire, made coffee. Elara would emerge from behind the curtain an hour later, moving quiet as smoke, and they would share breakfast in companionable silence. On the first day she ate only half her portion, saving the rest as if expecting it to be taken away. Samuel saw this, and the next morning gave her a smaller serving, then offered seconds. By the third day she ate what he gave her, trusting it would be enough, and there would be more tomorrow. On the second day she tried to take over all the cooking and cleaning, falling into patterns learned from years of servitude. Samuel stopped her, gently showed her they would share the work. It took 3 attempts before she understood he meant it. On the fourth day he began teaching her, not sign language, though he knew some. Instead he taught her the language of his people, the Apache tongue that relied as much on gesture and context as on sound. He would point to objects and sign their names: fire, water, wood, sky. She absorbed it with fierce concentration, her slate always ready to write down what she learned. On the 5th day she smiled for the first time. It was brief, gone almost as soon as it appeared, prompted by one of Samuel's carvings, a small rabbit ears alert frozen mid-hop. She picked it up, examined it, and something in her face transformed for just a moment. Samuel felt that smile like a physical thing, warm and unexpected. On the 6th day it snowed again, heavy and thick. They were snowed in, unable to do anything but tend the fire and wait it out. Samuel carved while Elara read from his books, slowly working her way through a volume of Emerson's essays. That evening she wrote on her slate, "Why do you carve?" Samuel considered the question, then wrote back, "My hands need to be busy. If they're not, I remember things I'd rather forget." "What things?" He was quiet for a long time, then wrote, "War, death, all the ways I've failed people I loved." She read this and wrote, "Me too, except I remember by being still. Maybe we balance each other." On the 7th day the nightmare came for Samuel. He woke in darkness, heart hammering, the dream still vivid. Sarah's face pale and accusing. "You promised you'd come back for her. You promised." He sat up, sweat soaking his shirt despite the cold, and tried to breathe through the panic. Then he heard it. 3 knocks on the wall, measured and deliberate. Elara's signal, the one he had taught her on the first night. "If you need me, knock 3 times. He stood and moved to the curtain that separated her sleeping area from the rest of the cabin. She sat on the bed, slate in hand, watching him. Bad dream, she had written. He nodded. She gestured to the floor beside her bed, not inviting him close, but offering proximity. He understood. She had learned that sometimes the presence of another person, even in silence, could hold back the dark. He sat with his back against the wall 3 feet from her bed, close enough to see, far enough not to crowd. They sat like that for 20 minutes, neither moving, neither speaking, just being present for each other in the dark. Finally, Samuel's breathing steadied. The panic receded. He looked at Elara and nodded his thanks. She wrote on her slate, "We take turns keeping watch. Tonight was mine." Samuel felt something crack in his chest. Some armor he had worn for so long he had forgotten it was there. This girl, this broken, scarred girl, was offering to protect him the way he had promised to protect her. He wrote back, "Partners, then." She nodded. "Partners." The second week began with a change in the weather. The heavy snows paused, replaced by clear, cold days that made the world glitter like diamonds. Samuel took Elara outside, began teaching her the skills she would need: how to read animal tracks in snow, how to set snares for rabbits, how to find water under ice, how to navigate by stars and landmarks. She learned quickly her silence an advantage when stalking game. Her observation skills honed by years of reading people for signs of danger. On the 10th day, she caught her first rabbit. Samuel showed her how to clean it, how to waste nothing. That night they ate fresh meat, and Ilara wrote, "I'm useful now. I can contribute." Samuel wrote back, "You were always useful, but yes, now you can feed yourself if you need to. That's freedom." On the 11th day, she asked about Sarah. They were sitting by the fire, the evening meal finished, when she wrote, "Tell me about my mother." What was she like? Samuel spent a long time on his answer, filling multiple pages with careful handwriting. "Sarah was the kindest person I ever knew. When I was young, angry at the world for what it had done to our people, she was the one who showed me there was still good in it. She loved to sing, loved to make things grow. She had a garden, even in the worst times coaxed vegetables from hard ground through sheer will and tenderness. She fell in love with Josiah when he was different before the drink took him. He was young, optimistic, full of dreams about striking it rich. She saw something in him I never could. When our family wouldn't accept him, she left everything behind. I tried to stop her, told her it would end badly. We fought. She left anyway. That was my failure. I let her go in anger instead of love. I didn't speak to her for 3 years. When I finally went to find her, to apologize, to bring her home, I found only Josiah and a grave, or what I thought was a grave. Ilara read all this, tears sliding down her cheeks, silent as everything else about her. When she finished, she wrote, "She sounds wonderful. I wish I remembered more." Then she wrote something else. The letter. "Sarah's letter to you. How did you get it if she died 5 years ago?" This was the question Samuel had been dreading. He pulled out the letter again, the original, and pointed to the date at the top. 5 years old. Then he showed her the envelope it had arrived in 6 months ago, fresh, new, sealed with wax. Ilara's eyes went wide. "Someone kept it for 5 years and then sent it to you." Samuel nodded. "I don't know who, don't know why they waited, but they knew exactly when to send it. Exactly when you would be old enough to leave, old enough to need help. Who would do that?" Samuel wrote. Sarah had a friend, a woman named Mary Whitfield, who ran the boarding house where Sarah lived before she married Josiah. When I came to Silver Creek 5 years ago, after Sarah's death, Mary was gone. The boarding house was closed. No one knew where she went. You think she sent it. I think Sarah planned this before she died. Asked Mary to wait 15 years, then send the letter. A last gift, a last attempt to save her daughter, even from beyond the grave. Ilara absorbed this, then wrote, "She loved me." Samuel nodded, "More than anything." On the 13th day, Ilara found her voice. Not the literal voice Josiah had stolen, but something else. Samuel was carving by the fire when she approached with her slate. "I want to learn to fight." Samuel looked up surprised. "Fight?" She wrote quickly, "You know how. I see it in the way you move. Teach me. I never want to be helpless again." Samuel considered this. Teaching her to fight meant teaching her violence, but he understood the need. Helplessness was its own kind of death. He nodded. "We start tomorrow." On the 14th day, their last day of peace before the world intruded again, Samuel began teaching Ilara the basics. Not just how to throw a punch, but how to think like someone who could defend themselves. Balance first. Awareness. How to use size against an opponent, where the vulnerable points were on a human body. How to fight dirty when survival was at stake. She absorbed it all with the same fierce concentration she brought to everything. By evening she was exhausted, covered in bruises from practice falls, but there was something new in her eyes. Confidence. That night, as they sat by the fire eating dinner, Ilara pulled out her slate and wrote, "I'm happy. For the first time, I can remember I'm happy." Samuel read it and felt the weight of that statement. Happy. Such a small word for such a large thing. He wrote back, "Good. You deserve happiness." She smiled, then erased the slate and wrote, "So do you. Before Samuel could respond, she stood and went behind the curtain to her sleeping area. He heard her moving around, then quiet. He sat by the fire staring at those 3 words. So do you. Did he deserve happiness? After all his failures, all the people he hadn't saved, he didn't know. But maybe for the first time in 10 years, he was willing to find out. Later that night, after Samuel had banked the fire and laid out his bedroll, he heard movement from Alara's area. Then she emerged from behind the curtain fully dressed, holding something in her hands. An old coat, his sister's coat, the one he had packed away with her other belongings, unable to look at them, but unable to throw them away. Alara walked to the small table where lamplight still glowed. She reached into the coat's inside pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a letter old and yellowed with age. She held it up for Samuel to see, her face a question. Samuel sat up slowly, ice forming in his stomach. He had gone through Sarah's belongings after her death, had found nothing except clothes and a few books. He had never thought to check the coat's hidden pocket, the one Sarah had sewn into the lining herself. Alara brought the letter to him and placed it in his hands. The handwriting was Sarah's. Addressed to Alara Brennan, to be opened when you are grown. But there was a second letter beneath it, this one addressed to Samuel Crowfeather. Alara's eyes were wide, frightened, uncertain. She had found these letters while exploring the cabin during the day, found them and kept them secret until now. Samuel's hands shook as he unfolded the letter addressed to him. The paper crackled brittle with age. He read by lamplight while Alara watched her slate ready, waiting for explanation. The letter was short, devastating. Samuel, if you're reading this, then my plan worked. Alara is with you. She is safe. I'm sorry I lied to you. I'm not dead, not yet. But I will be soon. The sickness has me. Josiah doesn't know. He thinks I'm just weak from hard living. I couldn't tell you the truth 5 years ago because you would have come for me. You would have tried to save me. And Josiah would have killed Alara to hurt you. I know him now, know what he's capable of. So I let you think I was dead, let you grieve. And I made arrangements with Mary. She will send my old letter to you exactly 15 years after I leave Alara with Josiah. 15 years for Alara to grow strong enough to leave. 15 years for Josiah to grow weak enough not to follow. Alara is your niece, but she is also your daughter now. Raise her the way I would have. Teach her to be strong. Teach her that silence can be power. Teach her that she is loved. I'm sorry for the burden. I'm sorry for the lies. But I'm not sorry for trusting you. You are the only person in this world I trust with my daughter's life. Be well, brother. Thank you for keeping your promise. Samuel read it 3 times before the words fully penetrated. Sarah had orchestrated everything, the fake death, the delayed letter, the perfect timing, all of it calculated to save her daughter. He looked up at Alara, who was watching him with those dark, knowing eyes. She wrote on her slate. She wasn't murdered, she died of sickness. Samuel nodded slowly, the rage he had carried for 5 years draining away, replaced by something more complex. Grief, yes, but also admiration for his sister's cunning, her strength, her absolute commitment to protecting her child. He handed Alara the letter. She deserves to know, he wrote. Alara read Sarah's words to him, then picked up the second letter, the one addressed to her. She broke the seal and unfolded it with trembling hands. Samuel watched her face as she read, saw tears fall unchecked, saw her mouth form words even though no sound emerged, saw her press the letter to her chest like she could absorb her mother through paper and ink. When she finished, she showed him what Sarah had written. My darling Alara, you won't remember me, but I remember you, every detail. The way you laughed when you were 1 year old, the way you loved to touch my hair, the way you would fall asleep only if I sang to you. I'm sorry I have to leave you. I'm sorry you'll grow up thinking I abandoned you, but I want you to know every day I was alive, I thought of you. Every day I prayed you would survive until Samuel found you. You are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and you are loved, so deeply loved. Never let anyone make you small. Never let silence mean powerless. You have a voice even without sound. Use it. Your mother, always, Sarah. Below the signature was a small drawing, a mother and child hands linked, walking toward a mountain. Elara folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her own pocket. Then she looked at Samuel and wrote on her slate, "She gave me to you, not Josiah. You." Samuel nodded. "Yes." She wrote, "Partners." He wrote back, "Family." She erased and wrote again, "Family." They sat together in the lamplight, two people bound by blood and choice, and the careful plans of a dying woman who loved them both enough to lie, to wait, to trust in timing and fate. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow began to fall again, gentle this time. The mountain wrapped them in white silence, holding them safe for one more night. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The town would talk. Questions would be asked. But tonight, in this cabin on Bear Mountain, Samuel Crowfeather and Elara Brennan were simply uncle and niece, learning what it meant to be family. And that was enough. 3 weeks of peace. That was all they were given before the past came hunting. Samuel woke on the 22nd day to find Elara already dressed, standing by the window with her slate pressed against her chest. Something in her posture, rigid as carved wood, told him before she wrote a single word, "Someone's coming." He was at the window in 3 strides, looking down the mountain trail. 2 riders moving slow through fresh snow, still an hour away, maybe more, but definitely heading toward the cabin. Samuel recognized the lead horse even at this distance, Sheriff Cooper's bay mare, distinctive white blaze on her face. The second rider was harder to make out, bundled against the cold, but something about the way they sat, the saddle, spoke of authority. "Get your things," Samuel wrote quickly, "just in case we need to leave fast." Elara nodded and moved to gather the few possessions she had claimed as her own. Sarah's letters, the small rabbit carving Samuel had given her, a book of poetry she had been reading. She packed them into a canvas bag with practiced efficiency, a girl who had learned to travel light and leave quickly. Samuel loaded his rifle, checked his pistol, then forced himself to put both weapons away. Starting a conversation with guns drawn was a good way to end it with blood spilled, but he kept them close within reach. They waited. The riders appeared 40 minutes later, horses steaming in the cold morning air. Sheriff Cooper dismounted first, moving with the careful slowness of a man who understood he was unwelcome and potentially in danger. The second rider stayed mounted. A man in his 50s, weathered face framed by graying sideburns, wearing a heavy coat with a badge pinned to the lapel. Federal Marshal Samuel recognized the type instantly. He had worked with enough of them during his scouting days. Samuel stepped onto the porch, Elara just behind him, close enough to retreat inside if needed, far enough to show they weren't hiding. Sam, Sheriff Cooper called out, voice carrying across the clearing. "We need to talk, then talk." The marshal dismounted, movement stiff from cold and age. He studied Samuel with eyes that had seen too much and judged everything. When he spoke, his voice was gravel and iron. "I'm Federal Marshal Jacob Cross. I've been sent to investigate a complaint filed in Silver Creek regarding the disappearance of one Elara Brennan, white female, age 19, last seen in your company." "She's not disappeared," Samuel said calmly. "She's standing right here." Cross's gaze shifted to Elara, studied her like she was evidence rather than a person. "Miss Brennan, are you here of your own free will?" Elara stepped forward and held up her slate. On it, in large letters, she had already written, "Yes. I am here because I choose to be." Cross frowned. "The complaint states you're deaf and unable to communicate, that you've been taken advantage of due to diminished mental capacity." Samuel felt rage rise hot and fast, but Elara touched his arm, stopping him. She erased her slate and wrote quickly, then held it up. "I am deaf. I am not stupid. I can read and write in 2 languages. I understand everything you say, and I choose to be here with my uncle. Your Uncle Cross looked between them, skepticism written plain on his face. He's Apache. You're white. Alara wrote, my mother was his sister. Sarah Crow Feather. She married Josiah Brennan against her family's wishes. I am their daughter. Sheriff Cooper stepped forward. Is that true, Sam? Sarah was the girl's mother. Samuel nodded. I have letters, written in Sarah's hand, explaining everything. Cross snorted. Letters can be forged. I'll need more proof than that. Samuel turned and went inside, returning moments later with the envelope that contained both of Sarah's letters and several old photographs he had kept. Pictures of Sarah as a young woman, her Apache features clear. Pictures of Sarah and Josiah on their wedding day. Josiah young and sober and almost handsome. And one picture precious and worn of Sarah holding a baby girl with dark hair and darker eyes. He handed them to Cross, who examined each one carefully. The marshal's expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders eased fractionally. These could support your story, Cross admitted. But it doesn't change the legal situation. Miss Brennan is still a minor under territorial law. Josiah Brennan is still her legal guardian. He has rights. He gave up those rights when he sold her to me, Samuel said quietly. Sold. Cross's attention sharpened. You admit you purchased her. I won her in a card game, Samuel corrected. He offered her as stakes. The whole saloon witnessed it. Ask Sheriff Cooper. Cooper nodded reluctantly. It's true. Josiah was drunk, offered the girl as payment for an old debt. Sam won fair and square, near as I could tell. Gambling for a human being is illegal, Cross pointed out, which makes this whole arrangement void. Samuel felt the trap closing. The law, always the law, designed to protect men like Josiah and condemn men like him. But Alara was already writing her chalk, scratching fast and angry. Josiah Brennan murdered my mother. He cut my throat when I was 7 years old to keep me from telling. He beat me and starved me for 12 years. If you send me back to him, he will kill me. She pulled down her collar, showing the scar. Even in the cold morning light, it was unmistakable. A deliberate cut, precise and cruel. Cooper went pale. Sweet Jesus, Sam, is this true? Samuel nodded. She told me the night I brought her here. She witnessed Sarah's murder when she was 3 years old. Josiah silenced her to protect himself. Cross studied the scar with professional detachment, but something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or disgust. That's a serious accusation. Without proof. I am the proof. Alara wrote, underlining each word hard enough to crack the slate. My scar, my testimony, my memories. Testimony from a deaf girl who can't speak in court. Cross shook his head. No judge would accept it. You need witnesses, evidence, something concrete. Then arrest Josiah. Samuel said, investigate. You'll find the truth. On what grounds? A card game from 3 weeks ago. A scar that could have come from any accident. The confused memories of a child. They're not confused. Samuel's voice hardened. She remembers every detail, and she's not going back. Cross's hand moved to the pistol at his hip, not drawing, just resting there. That's not your decision to make, Crowfeather. The law is clear. She's a minor. He's her legal guardian. Unless you have proof of abuse that would satisfy a judge, she goes back. Over my dead body. The words hung in the cold air like smoke. Sheriff Cooper stepped between them, hands raised. Now let's all just calm down. Nobody needs to die here today. Sam, you know I don't like this any more than you do, but Marshal Cross is right about the law. We need proof. Real proof. You want proof. Samuel turned and went inside again. This time he returned with a thick envelope, the one he had been saving, the one he had hoped never to need. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Letters from Sarah to Samuel over the years, letters that detailed the abuse. Letters that mentioned Josiah's drinking, his rages, his violence. Letters that spoke of fear for Ilara's safety. He handed them to Cross. Read them. All of them. Then tell me the law wants that girl sent back." Cross took the letters and began reading. His face remained impassive, but Samuel watched his jaw tighten with each page. When he finished, he looked up at Sheriff Cooper. "This changes things. These letters describe a pattern of abuse and neglect. Combined with the girl's testimony and physical evidence—" "She can't testify," Cooper reminded him. "She's deaf and mute." "She can write," Samuel said. "And I can translate her Apache sign language." Between the two, a judge would hear her story. Cross considered this, turning it over in his mind like a coin. Finally, he nodded. "All right, here's what we do. Miss Brennan stays here for now. I'll ride back to Silver Creek and open a formal investigation into Josiah Brennan. If I find evidence supporting these accusations, I'll arrest him and petition the court to remove him as guardian." "And if you don't find evidence," Samuel asked, "then we revisit this conversation. But with proper legal representation for everyone involved." It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't surrender either. Samuel nodded slowly. "How long?" "2 weeks, maybe 3. I need to interview witnesses, examine records, build a case that will hold in court." Elara was writing again. She held up her slate. "Thank you for listening." Cross looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time Samuel saw the man beneath the badge. Someone who maybe had a daughter of his own. Someone who understood that justice and law weren't always the same thing. "I'll do right by you," Miss Cross said quietly. "One way or another, I'll make sure you're safe. You have my word." After they left, Samuel and Elara stood on the porch, watching the riders disappear down the mountain trail. The sun had climbed higher, turning the snow to diamonds, but Samuel felt no warmth. 2 weeks, he wrote on a scrap of paper. Maybe 3. We used that time to prepare. Prepare for what Elara wrote back. For the possibility that the law fails us, that we need to run or fight. She studied his face, reading things he hadn't written. Then she nodded and wrote, "Teach me more." So he did. For the next 10 days, Samuel taught Elara everything he knew about survival. Not just the basics of tracking and hunting they had already covered, but the harder lessons. How to disappear, how to live off the land when there was no shelter, how to read people for signs of deception or danger, how to kill if killing became necessary. That last lesson was the hardest. Samuel had killed men before in war and in self-defense, and it had left marks on his soul that would never heal. He didn't want that for Elara, but he wanted her, helpless, even less. He taught her where to strike to disable rather than kill. The eyes, throat, groin, knees. Vulnerable points where a small person could hurt a large one. He taught her how to use everyday objects as weapons. A fork, a fire poker, a book. Anything could be a weapon if you were desperate enough. She absorbed it all with grim determination, practicing until her hands bled, until exhaustion made her movements sloppy, then practicing more. On the 7th day of training, as they sparred in the clearing behind the cabin, Samuel saw her hesitate. They had been going through strike sequences, Samuel calling them out in Apache sign, while Elara executed them against a training post he had set up. But when he signed throat strike, she froze. Her hand went to her own throat, to the scar there. Her face went pale. Samuel stopped immediately, held up both hands in the sign for peace for stop. Elara sank to her knees in the snow, breathing hard, tears streaming down her face. He approached slowly, giving her space to retreat if needed, but she didn't move, just knelt there, one hand pressed to her throat, the other clutching snow. Samuel knelt in front of her and waited, gave her time to come back from wherever the memory had taken her. Finally, she pulled out her slate with shaking hands and wrote, "I can't strike there, can't hurt someone the way he hurt me." Samuel read it and felt his heart break a little. He wrote back, "You don't have to. There are other ways to fight, other targets. But what if that's the only way to survive? What if I have to choose between my life and someone else's?" "Then you choose your life," Samuel wrote, "always. Your survival is not a sin, it's a right. Even if it means becoming like him. You could never become like him, Samuel wrote firmly. He hurt you because he was weak and cruel. You would hurt someone only to protect yourself. That's not the same thing. Intent matters. Choice matters. She read this multiple times, then nodded slowly, wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and stood. Show me another way, she wrote, one that doesn't involve the throat. So Samuel adjusted the training, focused on other vulnerable points, other techniques, and Alara threw herself back into it with renewed focus. That night, as they ate dinner in the cabin's warmth, Alara wrote something on her slate and showed it to him. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of becoming a monster to survive. Samuel thought about this for a long time before responding. Finally, he wrote, The fact that you worry about that proves you never will. Monsters don't question themselves. On the 10th day, a snowstorm rolled in, violent and sudden, trapping them inside the cabin. Wind howled around the walls like something alive and hunting. Snow built up against the door until Samuel had to dig them out every few hours just to keep it from blocking them in completely. They passed the time reading, carving, talking through written notes. Alara had questions about everything. About Samuel's time with the cavalry, about Apache culture, about the world beyond Silver Creek and Bear Mountain. Samuel answered as best he could, sometimes filling entire pages with cramped handwriting to explain complex ideas. Tell me about the war, she wrote that evening as wind rattled the shutters. Samuel hesitated. The war was not something he spoke of easily. Too many ghosts, too much blood. But she was looking at him with those dark, patient eyes, waiting, and he found he couldn't refuse her. He began to write slowly at first, then faster as the memories came flooding back. I was 20 when the cavalry recruited me. They wanted scouts who knew the land, who could track, who could move silent. I thought it would be a way to protect my people, to prove we were valuable, worth keeping alive. I was young and stupid. The work was good at first. I tracked deserters, found lost patrols, helped navigate difficult terrain. But then the wars started. Apache against cavalry, cavalry against Cheyenne, everyone against everyone. And I was expected to choose sides. I chose survival. I scouted for the army because refusing meant death. But I also warned my people when I could, gave them time to run to hide. I played both sides and hated myself for it. At Cedar Creek, we caught a Cheyenne war party that had raided a settlement. They had women and children with them, families trying to escape to Canada. The commander wanted them all killed, every one. I refused. Said they weren't combatants, weren't armed. The commander drew his pistol and told me to follow orders or be shot for insubordination. I followed orders. 15 people died that day. Women, children, old men. I didn't pull the trigger myself, but I had found them. I had tracked them down and delivered them to slaughter. After that, I couldn't do it anymore. I turned in my resignation, took my discharge papers, and came here to the mountain. Been here 10 years trying to forget, but you never forget. The ghosts follow you. Samuel finished writing and handed the pages to Alara. She read them slowly, carefully, then looked up at him with eyes full of understanding rather than judgment. She wrote, You saved Josiah at Cedar Creek. That's the debt he owed you. Samuel nodded. She continued writing, You saved a bad man's life. Now you're saving mine. Maybe that balances the scales. It doesn't bring back the dead, Samuel wrote. No, Alara agreed. But it gives meaning to their deaths. You learned from that mistake. You chose differently. That matters. Samuel wanted to believe her. Wanted to think that saving one girl could balance 15 murders. But the math didn't work, couldn't work. Still, when Alara reached across the table and placed her hand over his, he didn't pull away. They sat like that while the storm raged outside, two people holding onto each other against the dark. On the 11th day, the storm broke. The world emerged white and clean, and silent snow piled in drifts, taller than a man. Samuel spent the morning digging out the cabin, clearing paths to the woodpile and the small shelter where he kept the horse. Elara helped working until her hands were red and raw, despite the gloves Samuel had given her. She had gained strength over the past weeks, muscle building on her small frame from the physical work and training. She no longer looked like a girl who might break at any moment. In the afternoon, she asked Samuel to teach her to shoot. He had been expecting this request, had prepared for it. He brought out his rifle, showed her how to hold it, how to aim, how to breathe through the shot. They set up targets in the clearing, pieces of wood with charcoal marks for aiming points. Samuel demonstrated first hitting center mass on 3 consecutive shots. Then he handed Elara the rifle. She hefted it, testing the weight, getting a feel for the balance. Settled it against her shoulder the way Samuel had shown her, sighted down the barrel. The first shot went wide, startling her with the recoil and noise she couldn't hear, but could feel vibrating through her bones. The second shot hit the edge of the target. The third shot found center mass. Samuel watched her face as she shot, saw concentration sharpen into something fiercer. This wasn't just about self-defense. This was about power, about taking back control. They practiced until the light began to fail, and Elara's shoulder was bruised from recoil. When they went back inside, she wrote, "Thank you." Samuel wrote back, "You're a natural, better than most men I taught." She smiled at that, small but real. That night, Samuel had the nightmare again, Sarah's face accusing, the children at Cedar Creek crying, blood on snow, blood on his hands. He woke gasping and immediately heard 3 knocks on the wall. Elara emerged from behind the curtain, already dressed, slate in hand. "Bad one," she had written. Samuel nodded, still trying to slow his racing heart. She sat on the floor across from him, the banked fire between them casting just enough light to see by. "Tell me," she wrote. Samuel shook his head. "You don't need my nightmares added to your own." She wrote back, "Maybe sharing them makes them smaller." So Samuel told her in halting written words about Cedar Creek, about the faces of the children, about the sound of gunfire echoing off canyon walls, about the way the snow had turned red. When he finished, Elara was quiet for a long time. Then she wrote, "You can't change the past, but you can choose what you do with the guilt. You can let it destroy you, or you can let it guide you to better choices." How do you know that Samuel wrote? "You're 19 years old." She wrote, "I spent 12 years hating myself for not saving my mother, for being too small, too young, too weak. I nearly died from that hate. Then I realized keeping myself small and weak and hateful was letting him win. Living, getting strong, choosing differently, that was the real revenge." Samuel read this and felt something shift inside him. This girl, who had every reason to be bitter and broken, had instead chosen to be strong, had chosen growth over revenge, survival over surrender. Maybe there was wisdom in that. Maybe there was a path forward that didn't require carrying the dead on his back forever. He wrote, "Thank you." She wrote back, "Partners, remember we carry each other." The 14th day dawned clear and cold. Samuel was outside splitting wood when he saw the riders coming up the trail. Not 2 this time, 5. Marshal Cross in the lead, Sheriff Cooper beside him. And 3 men Samuel didn't recognize, hard-looking men with guns worn easy and eyes that scanned the terrain like they expected trouble. Samuel's gut tightened. This wasn't a social call. He whistled sharp the signal he had taught Elara. Danger coming. She appeared in the doorway, instantly took in the riders, and disappeared back inside. Samuel knew she was gathering their emergency packs, preparing to run if needed. The riders stopped in the clearing. Cross dismounted, face grave. "Samuel Crow Feather," he said formally. "I'm here with news regarding the investigation into Josiah Brennan." Samuel waited, hand resting casual on the axe handle. Cross continued, "I spent 2 weeks in Silver Creek and the surrounding area. I interviewed witnesses, examined records, spoke with everyone who had known Sarah Crow Feather and her daughter. And I found nothing that would hold up in court." The words hit Samuel like bullets. Nothing. People remember, Sarah Cross said. Remember her leaving with Josiah. Remember her dying supposedly in childbirth. But no one witnessed a murder. No one can corroborate the girl's story about being silenced. The doctor who would have treated her throat injury died 6 years ago. His records were lost in a fire. What about the letters Samuel demanded? Hearsay. Sarah's dead. Can't testify to their authenticity. A good lawyer would tear them apart. So, that's it. You're just giving up. Cross's jaw tightened. I don't give up. But I need evidence. Without it, my hands are tied. One of the other men stepped forward, older than the rest, with a face like weathered leather and eyes cold as winter sky. Mr. Crow Feather, my name is Judge Wellingham from Cedar Falls. I've been asked to adjudicate this matter. Based on the evidence, or lack thereof, I'm ordering Miss Brennan returned to her legal guardian. Samuel felt rage and fear war inside him. Over my dead body. That can be arranged, one of the other men said quietly. His hand was on his pistol. Everyone calm down. Sheriff Cooper stepped forward. Judge, there has to be another way. You didn't see that girl's scar. Didn't read those letters. I've seen the marshal's report, Wellingham said coldly. Scars can come from accidents. Letters can be forged. What I haven't seen is actual proof of criminal wrongdoing. Without that, the law is clear. Elara stepped out onto the porch, then, rifle in her hands, pointed at the ground, but ready. Her face was set, determined. She walked to Samuel's side and pulled out her slate, wrote in large letters, and held it up. I will not go back. You will have to kill me. Miss Brennan, Judge Wellingham's voice took on a patronizing tone. You don't understand what you're saying. This man has clearly influenced you, perhaps even coerced you. Once you're away from him, you'll see things more clearly. Elara's eyes flashed. She erased the slate and wrote again. I understand perfectly. I watched my mother die. I felt the knife cut my throat. I survived 12 years of hell. Do not tell me I don't understand. The judge's face reddened. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Stockholm Syndrome. The savage has turned her against her own father. He's not a savage, Sheriff Cooper said quietly. And Josiah Brennan has never been a father to that girl. That's not for you to decide, Wellingham snapped. Marshal Cross, I'm ordering you to take Miss Brennan into custody. By force, if necessary. Cross looked at Elara, at Samuel, at the rifle in her hands. His face was troubled. Judge, I don't think that's wise. It's an order, Marshal. Samuel felt time slow down, felt his hand move toward the pistol at his belt, felt Elara tense beside him, ready to raise the rifle. This was it, the moment where everything went to blood and bullets, where the law and justice finally broke apart completely. But before anyone could draw, a new voice cut through the tension. Hold on just a goddamn minute. Everyone turned. A rider was coming up the trail horse, lathered from hard riding. As they got closer, Samuel recognized the thin frame and sharp features of Mrs. Abigail Fletcher, the minister's wife from Silver Creek. She dismounted before her horse had fully stopped, marched right up to Judge Wellingham with no fear at all. Judge, I need to speak with you, now, Mrs. Fletcher. This is a legal proceeding. Then make it legal and listen to a witness. I have information relevant to this case. Wellingham sighed. Fine. Speak. Mrs. Fletcher pulled a thick envelope from her coat. Inside were letters old and yellowed. These are letters from Sarah Crow Feather to me. We were friends, Judge, close friends. She told me everything. About Josiah's abuse, about her fear for Elara, about the night she caught Josiah trying to hurt the girl and how she stopped him. She turned to Marshal Cross. You asked me if I knew anything about Sarah's death. I said no because I was afraid. Josiah threatened me, said if I ever spoke about what I knew, he'd burn down the church with my husband inside. But I can't stay silent anymore, not when that girl's life is at stake. Cross took the letters and began reading. His face went hard as stone. These detail specific incidents of abuse, he said. Dates, injuries, threats. This is the evidence we needed. Mrs. Fletcher wasn't finished. She turned to Judge Wellingham. "There's more. Sarah's attending physician before he died, he was my cousin. Before he passed, he told me about a girl he treated in secret, a 7-year-old with a cut throat brought to him by her father who claimed it was an accident with a broken bottle. But my cousin said the cut was too clean, too precise, made with a blade, not glass. He wanted to report it, but Josiah threatened him too, said he had friends who would make sure the doctor never practiced medicine again. My cousin kept notes, private notes separate from his official records. When he died, his wife gave them to me for safekeeping." She pulled out another envelope, this one sealed with wax. Marshal Cross broke the seal and read. When he looked up, his eyes were blazing. "This is a detailed account of treating a deliberately inflicted wound, signed and dated. This is evidence." Judge Wellingham took the notes, read them himself. His face went pale. "Well," he said finally, "this does change things." "Damn right it does," Mrs. Fletcher said fiercely. "That man is a monster. He killed his wife. He mutilated his daughter. And you were about to send her back to him." She turned to Elora. "I'm sorry, child. I should have spoken up years ago, should have protected you the way Sarah asked me to. I was a coward, but I'm not a coward anymore." Elora's eyes were full of tears. She wrote on her slate, "Thank you." Marshal Cross gathered all the documents, the letters from Sarah to Samuel, from Sarah to Mrs. Fletcher, the doctor's private notes. Combined, they painted a picture impossible to ignore. "Judge Wellingham," he said formally, "I'm requesting a warrant for the arrest of Josiah Brennan on charges of murder and assault with intent to maim. I'm also requesting that you remove him as Miss Brennan's legal guardian pending a full investigation." Wellingham nodded slowly. "Granted, on both counts." He looked at Samuel. "Mr. Crow-Feather, Miss Brennan will remain in your custody temporarily. However, we'll need to establish a proper legal arrangement. Guardianship papers, proof of relationship, all filed correctly." Samuel nodded. "Whatever is needed." The judge and his men mounted up. Before they left, Wellingham looked back. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I was wrong. About you. About this situation, I apologize." After they rode away, Samuel, Elora, and Mrs. Fletcher stood in the clearing, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. Mrs. Fletcher turned to Elora. "Your mother was my dearest friend. I failed her when she needed me most. I won't fail you." She mounted her horse, preparing to leave. But before she did, she said to Samuel, "Take care of her. Sarah loved you more than anyone. She knew you'd protect her daughter when no one else would." Then she was gone, leaving Samuel and Elora alone. They stood in the clearing as the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Elora pulled out her slate. "We won," she wrote. Samuel shook his head gently. "The battle, not the war. Josiah will be arrested, but trials take time, and hate doesn't die just because the law says so. Then we prepare for the war," Elora wrote. "Together." Together, Samuel agreed. That night they sat by the fire and made plans for what came next, for how to navigate the legal system, for how to build a life that didn't require constantly looking over their shoulders. But beneath all the planning was a simpler truth. They had each other. They had proof of the bond between them. They had witnesses willing to stand up for them. It wasn't safety, not yet. But it was more than they'd had before. As Elora slept that night, peaceful for once, without nightmares, Samuel sat watch and thought about Sarah, about her careful planning, her long game, her trust that he would come when called. She had given him a gift he didn't deserve, a chance at redemption, a family. He wouldn't waste it. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady. The mountain wrapped them in its ancient silence, a fortress against the world below. Samuel banked the fire and listened to Elora's breathing, steady and peaceful. They had won this round. The next would come soon enough. But tonight belonged to them. The arrest of Josiah Brennan should have been the end of it, should have brought closure, safety, peace. Instead, it opened a wound that Silver Creek had been content to leave festering in darkness. Samuel heard about the arrest 3 days after Marshal Cross left the mountain. A rider brought news a young deputy named Thomas Hayes, who looked barely old enough to shave. He sat nervous on his horse while Samuel read the official notice. Josiah Brennan had been taken into custody without incident. Too drunk to fight, too broken to run, he was being held in the territorial prison in Helena, awaiting trial. The charges were murder in the first degree for Sarah's death and assault with intent to maim for what he had done to Elara. If convicted, he would hang. Elara read the notice over Samuel's shoulder. Her face remained impassive, but Samuel felt her hand find his fingers, interlacing, holding tight. After the deputy left, she wrote on her slate, "I should feel something. Relief, anger, something. But I just feel empty." Samuel understood. Revenge was supposed to bring satisfaction, but it rarely did. The dead stayed dead. The scars remained. Justice was just a word people used to make sense of senseless things. He wrote back, "Empty is better than afraid. We'll fill the empty spaces with better things. Time, safety, life." She nodded, but her eyes were distant, looking at something he couldn't see. That night the nightmares came for both of them. Samuel woke to the sound of Elara thrashing behind the curtain, small whimpers escaping her damaged throat. He went to her, found her tangled in blankets, eyes open but unseeing, trapped in some memory. He touched her shoulder gently. She came awake with a gasp, swinging wild. Samuel caught her wrist carefully, held it, until recognition returned to her eyes. She collapsed against him, shaking, and for the first time since he had known her, she made sounds. Not words, nothing coherent, just broken noises of grief and fear that had been locked inside her for 12 years. Samuel held her while she shook, while the sounds poured out, while the dam finally broke. When she quieted, he helped her sit up and handed her the slate. She wrote with trembling hands, "I keep seeing him. Not as he is, now broken and pathetic, but as he was when I was 7, big, terrifying, standing over me with the knife." Samuel wrote, "He can't hurt you anymore. He's locked away, and even if he wasn't, I would stand between you and him, always." She read this and wrote, "I know," but the mind doesn't forget fear as easily as it should. They sat together until dawn, not speaking, not sleeping, just being present for each other in the dark. When the sun finally rose, weak and pale, through winter clouds, they were still sitting there, hands linked, survivors of the night. The legal proceedings began 2 weeks later. Samuel and Elara had to travel to Helena for the preliminary hearing, a journey of 3 days through snow and cold. Marshal Cross had arranged for them to stay at a boarding house run by a widow named Catherine Moore, a stern woman with kind eyes who asked no questions and offered quiet refuge. The courthouse was an imposing building of stone and dark wood designed to intimidate. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and older secrets. Men in suits moved through hallways like sharks, through water lawyers and judges and clerks, all serving the machine of justice. Elara had to testify, not in open court, not yet, but in the judge's chambers, a private deposition where her written testimony would be recorded for the trial. Samuel sat beside her while a court stenographer wrote down everything she communicated through her slate. The prosecuting attorney, a sharp man named Garrett with wire spectacles and a reputation for winning, asked questions with surgical precision. "Miss Brennan, in your own words, describe what you witnessed the night of your mother's death." Elara's hand shook as she wrote, but her words were clear and unflinching. "I was 3 years old. I woke because I heard shouting. My mother and Josiah were arguing in the next room. I got out of bed and looked through the crack in the door. I saw Josiah grab my mother by the throat. She tried to fight, but he was too strong. He squeezed until she stopped moving. Then he let her fall to the floor. I didn't understand she was dead. I thought she was sleeping. I went back to bed. In the morning, Josiah told me Mother had gone away and would never come back. And you tried to tell people what you had seen." "Yes. I told the minister's wife. I told the doctor. I told anyone who would listen. But no one believed a small child. They said I was confused, traumatized, making up stories because I missed my mother." When did Josiah cut your throat? 4 years later. I was 7. I had started telling the story again, this time with more detail, because I was older and remembered better. Josiah heard me telling Mrs. Fletcher. That night he came to my room with a knife. He held me down and cut my throat. He said if I couldn't talk, I couldn't tell lies. He said it was for my own good to keep me safe from being called a liar. The doctor's records indicate he brought you in, claiming it was an accident with broken glass. That's what he told everyone, but I know the truth. There was no broken glass, just the knife, just his hand over my mouth, just the pain. The attorney paused, letting the words sink in. Then, "Do you fear Josiah Brennan?" Laura wrote without hesitation. I did. For 12 years I lived in constant fear, but now, no, I pity him. He destroyed everyone who loved him. He destroyed himself. Fear is too much credit to give a man so small. After the deposition, Elara was exhausted. Samuel took her back to the boarding house where Mrs. Moore had prepared a hot meal and asked no questions about the tears on Elara's face. That night, Samuel found Elara standing at the window of their room, looking out at Helena's lights. She had her slate in hand but hadn't written anything. He approached quietly, letting her hear his footsteps so he wouldn't startle her. When he reached her side, she wrote, "Do you think he'll hang?" Samuel considered lying, offering comfort instead of truth. But Elara deserved honesty. He wrote back, "Probably. The evidence is strong. His crimes are unforgivable. Montana doesn't show mercy to men who kill women and hurt children." "Good," she wrote. "Then is it wrong that I want him to die?" Samuel wrote, "No. It's human. He took everything from you, your mother, your voice, your childhood. Wanting justice isn't wrong." But she wrote again, "Wanting him dead doesn't feel like justice. It feels like revenge, and revenge won't bring back what I lost." Samuel thought about this, about the men he had killed in war, about the satisfaction he had expected to feel, and the emptiness that came instead. He wrote, "Revenge and justice aren't the same thing. Justice is about protecting others from the same harm. Revenge is about making yourself feel better. You can want both. You're allowed to want both." She read this and nodded slowly. Then she wrote something that surprised him. "I want to see him. Before the trial. I want to face him one more time." Samuel's gut tightened. "Are you sure?" "Yes. I need to look him in the eye and let him see what I've become. I need him to know he failed to break me." The next day, Samuel arranged it through Marshal Cross. A supervised visit at the territorial prison, 15 minutes with armed guards present, and Samuel at Elara's side. The prison was a grim place of stone and iron, built to break spirits before bodies. Guards led them through corridors that echoed with distant sounds, cries and curses, and the clang of metal on metal. Josiah was brought to a small meeting room, wrists and ankles shackled. 2 weeks in prison had aged him a decade. His face was gaunt eyes, sunken skin yellow with sickness. He looked at Elara, and something flickered in those eyes. Fear, maybe, or recognition of his own mortality. The guard stepped back, but remained close, hand on his club. Elara pulled out her slate and wrote in large letters, then held it up so Josiah could read. "Do you remember cutting my throat?" Josiah flinched. His voice came out cracked and weak. "I was protecting you. You were telling lies, dangerous lies that would have gotten us both killed." Elara erased and wrote, "They weren't lies. You murdered my mother. I saw you." "She deserved it," Josiah spat. "She was going to leave me, take you away. I couldn't let that happen." "So you killed her." "I loved her." Josiah's voice broke. "I loved her, and she was going to take my daughter and disappear. What was I supposed to do?" "Let us go," Elara wrote. "Let us live. Love doesn't kill. Love protects." She erased and wrote again. "You destroyed everything you touched. My mother, me, yourself. And for what I left anyway, your cruelty changed nothing except to make you a monster." Josiah's face crumpled. He began to cry, shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was drunk. I was angry. I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did," Elara wrote. "You meant every cut, every blow, every cruel word. Own what you are." She stood preparing to leave, but wrote one final message. "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry your poison anymore. You will die alone and unmourned. I will live free and loved. That's my revenge." She turned and walked out without looking back. Samuel followed, glancing once at Josiah, who sat slumped in his chair, weeping into his shackled hands, a broken man facing the consequences of his choices. Outside the prison, Elara stood in the cold air, breathing deep like she was cleansing herself of something toxic. She wrote on her slate, "I needed to say those things," to his face. "Now it's done." "How do you feel?" Samuel asked. She thought about it, then wrote lighter. The trial began a week later. The courthouse was packed, standing room only. People drawn by the spectacle of an Apache scout defending a deaf girl against her white father. The newspapers had gotten hold of the story, twisted it into something sensational. "Savage rescues white maiden." One headline screamed, "Apache's questionable guardianship under scrutiny." Another proclaimed. Samuel ignored them all, focused on what mattered: the trial, the verdict, Elara's safety. Garrett, the prosecutor, was brilliant. He laid out the case with mathematical precision, Sarah's letters detailing abuse, the doctor's private notes about Elara's throat injury, Mrs. Fletcher's testimony about Josiah's threats, the timeline of Sarah's death, and the inconsistencies in Josiah's story. Elara's written testimony was read into the record, every word, every detail delivered in the clerk's monotone voice, while Elara sat silent in the gallery, Samuel's hand in hers. Josiah's defense attorney, a tired man named Sullivan, who clearly knew he was fighting a losing battle, tried to argue diminished capacity. His client had been drunk, didn't know what he was doing, was overcome with grief and jealousy. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge the same. Wellingham, who had nearly sent Elara back to Josiah, pronounced sentence with grim satisfaction. "Josiah Brennan, you have been found guilty of murder in the first degree and assault with intent to maim. The court sentences you to death by hanging sentence to be carried out 30 days hence. May God have mercy on your soul." Josiah showed no reaction. Just sat there empty, already a ghost. Elara wrote on her slate, "It's over." Samuel wrote back, "Yes, it's over." But it wasn't. Not quite. The hanging was scheduled for March 15th. Elara didn't want to attend, but the prosecutor requested her presence. Some symbolic nonsense about victims witnessing justice. Samuel told Garrett absolutely not. Elara had given enough. She didn't need to watch a man die, even one who deserved it. But Elara surprised him. She wrote, "I want to be there. I want to see it finished. Are you sure this will stay with you? You can't unsee it." "I've already seen death," she wrote. "I watched my mother die. Watching him die doesn't frighten me." So on a cold March morning, they stood in the crowd outside the prison while Josiah Brennan was led to the gallows. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the certainty of death. The priest read scripture. The executioner fitted the noose. Josiah was given a chance for last words. He looked out at the crowd and found Elara. His voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't matter. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I'm sorry." Then the hood went over his head. The trapdoor opened. Josiah Brennan fell, and the rope went taut with a sound like a gunshot. It was over in seconds. Clean. Efficient. Justice served. Elara watched, without flinching, her face a mask. When it was done, she turned to Samuel and wrote, "Can we go home now, home?" She called the mountain home, called the cabin home, called him home. "Yes," Samuel wrote, "we can go home." But before they could leave Helena, one more piece of the past came calling. They were packing their things at the boarding house when Mrs. Moore knocked on their door. "You have a visitor," she said quietly. "A woman. Says she knew your mother." Samuel and Ilara exchanged glances. "Who?" She wouldn't give a name, just said it was important. They went downstairs to find a woman waiting in the parlor. She was perhaps 50. Apache features, weathered by hard living, wearing a mix of traditional and white clothing that spoke of someone caught between worlds. When she saw Samuel, she stood quickly. Her hands moved in Apache sign language, fluid and certain. "Brother, it's been a long time." Samuel's breath caught. He knew that face, older now, but unmistakable. Knows the stars, his and Sarah's cousin, who had disappeared 20 years ago when the reservations began. "Star," he signed back. "I thought you were dead. Most days I wish I was," she signed. "But I'm here for Sarah's daughter." She turned to Ilara, switched to English. "You look like her. Same eyes, same stubborn chin." Ilara pulled out her slate. "You knew my mother. I helped deliver you," Star said. "I was there the night you were born. Sarah asked me to stay to help her with the baby. But Josiah didn't want Indians around. Said we'd corrupt his white family. He drove me away." Her face darkened. "I should have fought harder to stay, should have taken Sarah with me, but she wanted to make it work with him. Thought love could change a violent man." Star sat down heavily. "I heard about the trial, about what he did to you. I came as soon as I could." "Why?" Samuel asked. "Why now, after all these years?" "Because I have something that belongs to her." Star pulled a leather pouch from her bag, worn soft with age. "Sarah gave this to me the night you were born, made me promise to give it to you when you were grown, when you were safe." She handed it to Ilara. "I'm sorry I'm late. I didn't know where you were, didn't know if you were even alive. But now I know. And now you can have what your mother wanted you to have." Ilara opened the pouch with trembling hands. Inside were treasures, a silver necklace with a turquoise pendant, a patch craftsmanship, beautiful and delicate. A small wooden doll carved with love and care. A journal, Sarah's journal filled with her thoughts and dreams and hopes for her daughter. And at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, a photograph. Sarah holding baby Ilara, Samuel standing beside them, all three smiling at the camera. A family. Before everything broke. Ilara's tears fell on the photograph, and she carefully wiped them away. She looked up at Star and wrote, "Thank you." Star nodded. "Your mother loved you more than life. She would be proud of the woman you've become, proud that you survived, proud that you're free." She stood to leave, but Samuel stopped her. "Stay," he said. "We're going back to Bear Mountain tomorrow. Come with us. Be family again." Star looked at him with eyes full of old pain. "I don't know how to be family anymore. I've been alone too long. So have I." Samuel said. "So has she. But we're learning, together." Star looked at Ilara, who was nodding, holding the journal to her chest like a lifeline. "All right," Star said quietly. "All right, I'll try." They left Helena the next morning, 3 people instead of 2. The journey back to Bear Mountain took 4 days, but it felt different this time. Lighter, like they were traveling towards something instead of away. Star proved useful on the trail, pointing out edible plants, reading weather in the clouds, moving through the forest like she had been born to it. She and Samuel fell into old rhythms, communicating in a mix of Apache and English and sign language that Ilara gradually began to understand. At night around the campfire, Star told stories about Sarah as a child, wild and free and full of laughter, about the old ways, the traditions that were dying but not dead yet, about survival and adaptation and the price of living in a world that wanted to erase you. Ilara absorbed it all, learning about her mother, learning about her heritage, learning who she was and where she came from. On the final night before reaching the cabin, Star pulled out a small drum and began to sing. An old song in the old language about a girl who was lost and found, who died and was reborn, who learned to fly on broken wings. Samuel recognized it, a mourning song, a healing song, a song Sarah had loved. When Star finished, Ilara pulled out her slate and wrote, "Will you teach me?" The songs, the language, the stories. Star looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, it's your birthright. You should know where you come from. That night, Samuel lay in his bedroll and listened to the two women breathing Star on one side of the fire, Elara on the other. His family. Small and damaged and perfect. He thought about Sarah, about her careful planning, about how she had orchestrated all of this from beyond the grave. The letters timed perfectly, Star appearing at exactly the right moment. All of it designed to give Elara not just survival, but a life, a family, a future. Thank you, sister, he thought into the darkness. I'll keep my promise. I'll protect her. We both will. The next day they reached the cabin. It looked exactly as they had left it, small and sturdy against the mountain's face. But now it would hold 3 instead of 2. They spent the next week settling into new rhythms. Star took over the small storage shed, turned it into living quarters with Samuel's help. Elara continued her training, but now Star added to it, teaching her Apache fighting techniques, ways of moving and striking that worked with small size instead of against it. In the evenings they gathered around the fire. Star told stories. Elara read from Sarah's journal, sharing her mother's words with those who had loved her. Samuel carved, creating new pieces. Small family of wooden figures, a mother and daughter, and uncle and cousin, all linked hands. 1 month after returning from Helena on a warm April evening, when the snow was finally melting and the first green was showing through, Elara made an announcement. She had been reading Sarah's journal, working her way through years of entries. Now she held it open to a specific page and showed it to Samuel and Star. Sarah had written, "If I don't survive to raise Elara myself, I hope Samuel will. And I hope he'll take her to the old place, the sacred canyon, where our mother is buried. I want Elara to know her roots, to know she comes from strength." Elara wrote on her slate, "I want to go there, to the sacred canyon, to see where grandmother is buried." Samuel and Star exchanged glances. The sacred canyon was 3 days' ride into the mountains on land that was technically reservation territory, now dangerous for Apache to enter without permission. But Star nodded slowly. "We can go. We should go. She needs to know." They prepared for the journey carefully, packed supplies for a week, told Mrs. Fletcher in town where they were going in case they didn't return, loaded weapons, and brought extra ammunition. The ride into the deep mountains was hard. The trails were overgrown, damaged by winter, barely passable. But Star navigated them like she was following a map written in her bones. On the 3rd day they entered a narrow canyon walls, rising steep on either side, a stream running through the middle that sang over smooth stones. At the far end, hidden behind a waterfall, was a cave. Inside the cave, the walls were painted with symbols and stories, handprints in red ochre, animals and hunters, stars and spirits, the history of a people written in pictures. And at the back, carefully arranged on a stone platform, were remains, bones wrapped in sacred cloth, weathered by time, but still treated with reverence. "This is your grandmother," Star said softly, switching to Apache. "Dancing Water. She was a healer and a warrior. She survived 3 massacres and died old in her sleep the way she wanted. She was also Sarah's mother," Samuel added, "and mine. Your blood comes from her. Her strength lives in you." Elara stood before the platform for a long time, not moving, just being present with this ancestor she had never known. Then she pulled out her slate and wrote, "Tell me about her." So they did. For hours Samuel and Star told stories about Dancing Water's life, her struggles, her triumphs, about how she had hidden her children when soldiers came, about how she had learned to heal with plants and ceremony, about how she had laughed in the face of death and taught her children to do the same. As the sun set and shadows filled the cave, Elara wrote, "I understand now why Mother was so strong, why she planned everything so carefully, why she never gave up." She wrote more, "I come from warriors, from healers, from survivors. This is who I am, "Yes," Star said, "this is who you are." That night they camped in the canyon, and Star performed a small ceremony, burning sage, singing old songs, asking the ancestors to watch over Ilara, to guide her, to give her strength for the battles yet to come. Ilara couldn't sing, but she stood in the smoke and let it wash over her, cleansing blessing, making her part of something larger than herself. When they returned to the cabin a week later, something had changed. Ilara carried herself differently, straighter, stronger, like she had found a missing piece of herself and fit it back into place. Spring turned to summer. Life on the mountain developed a peaceful rhythm. Star taught Ilara traditional crafts, basket weaving, and beadwork skills passed down through generations. Samuel taught her to track bigger game, to hunt deer and elk. Together they worked the small garden Star planted, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil. In June, official papers arrived from Helena. Legal guardianship granted to Samuel Crow Feather. Ilara Brennan, now legally Ilara Crow Feather, was his ward until she reached majority at 21. But there was more. A second set of papers, an inheritance. Josiah's few possessions had been sold off to pay debts. But the mining claim he had worked years ago, the one everyone thought was worthless, had been resurveyed. Someone had found silver, good silver. The claim was worth money, real money. And it all went to Ilara as Josiah's only heir. She read the papers and laughed, a silent shaking of shoulders that was as close as she could come to audible laughter. She wrote on her slate, "He spent his whole life digging for silver, and he died broke. Now that he's dead, the silver appears. The universe has a dark sense of humor." "What do you want to do with it?" Samuel asked. Ilara thought for a long moment, then wrote, "Sell it. Use the money to help other girls like me, girls trapped with violent fathers, girls who need escape." A few weeks later, Mrs. Fletcher visited with an idea. She had news first. "Silas Boone left town," she said, "week after the trial ended. Went to California last I heard. Couldn't face the shame of what he'd tried to do." Ilara wrote, "Good. Some people need distance to find wisdom." "Generous of you," Mrs. Fletcher observed. "Most would wish him worse." Ilara wrote again, "Hate takes energy. I'd rather spend mine on living." Mrs. Fletcher smiled at that. "Which brings me to why I came. What if we started a home, a safe house, where women and children could come when they needed to flee abuse?" Ilara's eyes lit up. She wrote, "Yes, that's perfect." So they did. Ilara's inheritance, combined with donations from others, funded the Sarah Crow Feather Home for women and children in Silver Creek. Mrs. Fletcher ran it with the help of other church women. It wasn't much, just a large house with a dozen beds, but it was safety for those who needed it. And Ilara had found purpose, found a way to transform her pain into protection for others. Sheriff Cooper visited the cabin one last time before autumn ended. He brought official closure papers. Guardianship finalized, all legal questions settled. But he also brought something else, an apology. "I should have done more," he told Samuel on the porch, hat in hands. "All those years. I knew something was wrong, but I told myself it wasn't my business, that the law didn't give me room to act." Samuel studied the older man, saw genuine regret in weathered features. "You came when it mattered," Samuel said finally. "That counts." Cooper nodded, relieved. Before he left, he turned to Ilara. "Your mother would be proud, miss. You're doing good work with that home." Ilara wrote on her slate, "Thank you for choosing justice over law." Cooper rode away, lighter than he'd arrived. Some debts, even old ones, could still be paid. By autumn, life had settled into something that felt almost normal. Samuel still had nightmares, sometimes still carried guilt for things he couldn't change. But they came less often now. The dead were quieter. Star had become a permanent fixture. Her storage shed expanded into a proper small house. She and Samuel had reconciled the distance of 20 years, finding their way back to being family. And Ilara had grown into herself. At 20, she was no longer the frightened girl Samuel had won in a card game. She was a woman strong and skilled and certain of her worth. One evening in late September, they sat on the cabin porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The air smelled of pine and coming winter. Elara pulled out her slate and wrote, "I've been thinking about the future." Samuel and Star waited. She wrote more, "I want to learn medicine, real medicine. I want to become a healer like grandmother. I want to help people." Star smiled. "I can teach you some, the old ways. Plant medicine, ceremony." And Samuel wrote, "There's a doctor in Missoula who might take an apprentice. I could write to him." Elara nodded eagerly. "Yes, both. Learn everything I can. Then come back here and help people who can't afford city doctors. It was a good dream, an achievable dream." Samuel wrote Sarah would be proud. Elara wrote back, "I'm proud. That's what matters." As darkness fell and stars emerged bright and countless, they sat together in comfortable silence. 3 survivors, 3 generations bound by blood and choice, and the careful love of a woman who had died to save her daughter. The mountain held them close, protected them, gave them space to heal and grow and become. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Life always did. But tonight on this mountain, in this moment, they were safe. They were family. They were home. And that was everything. Samuel looked at Elara, saw her silhouetted against the stars, and remembered the first time he had seen her. A shadow behind a curtain helping him cheat at cards, forming an alliance without words. Now she was family. Now she was healing. Now she was finding her own path. He had kept his promise to Sarah, had protected her daughter, given her space to become herself, and in doing so, he had saved himself. Found purpose again, found family again, found peace. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of coming snow. Winter would be here soon, but they were ready. Together they could face anything. Samuel Crow Feather, the giant Apache who had failed so many but had saved the one who mattered most. Elara Crow Feather, the silent warrior who had found her voice in ways that transcended sound. Star knows the stars. The wanderer who had finally come home. 3 people, 1 family. Built not from perfection, but from survival, not from ease, but from choice. And on a mountain in Montana Territory, as autumn gave way to winter and stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, they sat together and faced the future unafraid. Because they had each other, and that was enough.